He hadn't spoken to another soul in nearly 3 weeks, hadn't felt the warmth of human touch in over 20 years. Yet when Mercy Whitmore knocked on his weathered door that wine-brushed morning, everything Silas Ward thought he knew about solitude, about silence, about the hard-earned peace he'd buried himself beneath, was about to shift. The sun hung high and unrelenting over the dusty hills, casting long shadows across the porch boards as Silas stepped out, squinting against the light at the figure waiting on his front steps. A woman stood there in a faded blue dress, her auburn hair catching the sunlight like autumn fire. She held a small leather satchel in both hands, gripped not as luggage, but as a lifeline. She looked tired, worn down by roads too long and burdens too deep for her frame. But there was something in the way her spine stayed straight, in the tilt of her chin, that held fast against surrender. She didn't belong here, not on this isolated ranch nestled between nowhere and forgotten. But she was here. "Mr. Ward," she said, and her voice was not what he expected. It carried a quiet steel, like she'd practiced breaking through doubt. "I'm Mercy Whitmore. Heard in town you might teach someone to work a ranch." Silas felt his chest tighten, like a fist closing slow. 20 years without real conversation had turned words into a foreign tongue, stiff and uncertain. In his throat, he studied her face, marked with fatigue and dust, but framed by green eyes that burned with something that wouldn't die easy. There were lines around those eyes that spoke of nights spent pacing alone and mornings that never brought peace. Yet her expression, defiant despite exhaustion, held. "Don't take students," he said at last, his voice rough as gravel. "Especially not." His hand twitched in the air, gesturing vaguely, unsure how to finish the sentence without sounding cruel. "Especially not women." She didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped closer, and Silas caught the faint scent of lavender soap tangled with sweat and trail dust. "I can work harder than most men," she said simply. "I just need someone to show me how." There was no pleading in her voice, no desperation. It was just fact, a truth that didn't need validation. That quiet conviction stopped him cold. He ran a hand through the tangle of gray in his beard, feeling the familiar, crushing press of solitude trying to steer him back inside. "Why here?" he asked. "Why me?" Mercy's eyes drifted across the landscape, the neatly mended fences, the barns standing proud against time, the cattle grazing in the long golden field like nothing in the world had ever gone wrong. "Because they say you're the best," she said, pausing, her hands tightening slightly on the satchel's worn leather strap. "And because I need to learn fast." There was something in the urgency of her tone that slid under Silas's skin, a warning unspoken. He'd built a life of silence, carefully arranged and kept free of entanglements. But now, standing on his porch, a woman who looked like she'd been dragged halfway across the country by something dark was asking him to teach her how to stay put. "Can't pay much," she added quickly, "but I can work. Cleaning, cooking, whatever you need. I'll earn it." Silas's mind reeled through every reason to turn her away. Strangers were trouble. Women brought trouble, and Mercy Whitmore looked like she was hauling a mountain of it on her back. But beneath all the logic and well-earned wariness, something old and restless stirred. Maybe, just maybe, 20 years of loneliness had been long enough. "Milking starts before dawn," he said, the words slipping out before he could pull them back. "Work doesn't end till the sun does. It's hard, it's dirty, and it doesn't care how tired you are." A slow smile broke across Mercy's face, transforming her from dust-covered traveler into something near radiant. "When do we start?" He watched her clutch the satchel tighter, and he couldn't shake the feeling that she was running from something, that the cows might be the easiest part of what he'd just invited into his life. By the time Silas stepped out the next morning, the sky still bruised with night, Mercy was already waiting beside the barn. The blue dress was gone, replaced by oversized men's work clothes, cinched where they could be. Still too big on her slim frame, she stood like a shadow stitched into the ground, silent and steady, watching the stars blink out one by one as dawn began to bloom in the east. "Figured you'd change your mind," Silas muttered, carrying 2 wooden buckets toward the corral where the Jersey cows huffed warm breath into the crisp morning. "I don't change my mind," she answered, her tone as sure as it had been the day before. But Silas noticed the way her eyes kept flicking toward the horizon, scanning the mist like something might come crawling out of it. Inside the barn, he positioned the three-legged stool beside Bessie, his gentlest cow, the familiar warmth and scent of hay thick in the air. He showed her how to grip. The rhythm required firm but not harsh. To rough, and the cow would kick. To soft, and nothing would come. Mercy took to it awkwardly at first. Her hands were too smooth, her rhythm all wrong. But she didn't complain when Bessie twitched or swatted her with the tail. She just watched Silas with that same unsettling intensity, as if every motion he made mattered more than words. You learn fast, he admitted when she finally coaxed a steady stream of milk. Most folks take a week to figure that part out. I've had to learn everything fast, she murmured, almost to herself, then bit her lip like she'd said too much. Something tightened in Silas's chest again. He knew the shape of a person running, knew it in her stiff shoulders, in the way she listened more than she spoke, in how she kept her back toward the barn door, eyes flinching at every groan of the wind against the wood. "Where you from?" he asked finally, settling onto a hay bale, more curious than he wanted to admit. "East," she said after a long pause. "Far east." It wasn't an answer, and they both knew it. He studied her again, the way she kept her hands busy, the way her whole body flinched when a gust of wind rattled the rafters. He asked before he could stop himself, What are you running from?" She looked at him then, really looked, her green eyes full of the kind of shadows that didn't just linger. They burrowed deep. He knew that look. It mirrored his own from 20 years ago, when he buried Sarah beneath the cottonwoods and built walls around the wreckage of what remained. "Aren't we all?" she said softly. And somehow, that simple reply struck deeper than any confession. Silas swallowed hard. "The work helps," he said quietly, surprised at his own words. "Keeps the mind too tired to wander." Mercy nodded without looking at him. She understood. And as the sun lifted over the hills and painted gold across the walls, they milked in silence, shoulder to shoulder, the quiet between them not hollow, but shared. But when Silas stepped outside to empty the buckets into the cooling tank, something sharp pierced the calm. Fresh horse tracks, still soft in the dirt near the road. Not yesterday's postman. Someone had been close, watching, waiting. He said nothing as they mended fences that afternoon, but his eyes kept sweeping the tree line. Mercy threw herself into the work with the same desperate focus, hands blistering, but never pausing. "Why didn't you ever remarry?" she asked suddenly, wrestling with a stubborn post. The question hit harder than expected. He wasn't used to people asking him anything, but her voice wasn't nosy, it was kind, familiar, as if she already understood the answer. "Some wounds don't heal," he said. "Some folks just aren't meant to love twice." Mercy went still. Her fingers brushed a pale ring of skin on her left hand, the place a wedding band used to live. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard, is it?" he asked, watching her carefully. She turned away too quickly, but not before he saw at the flicker of something broken that hadn't had time to mend. Understanding something doesn't make it less sad. They worked until the sun dropped behind the western peaks. Silas found himself talking more than he had in years. Mercy asked things in a way that didn't pry, that allowed silence to grow without discomfort. But as they headed back to the house, he noticed how her steps slowed, how her eyes kept flicking toward the gathering dark. Confidence turned to caution, and fear curled around her again like a familiar shawl. "You can take the spare room," he said suddenly, "just until you figure your next move." Relief flooded her face so raw and complete it made something in him burn. "Thank you," she whispered. "I promise I won't be any trouble." But trouble had already found them. They had just reached the porch when hoofbeats echoed across the valley. 3 riders emerged from the shadows beneath the trees, moving slow and sure. Not travelers, not lost. Their faces were shaded, but their intent carried in the way they spread out deliberate. Practiced. Mercy froze beside him, her breath quick and shallow. "They found me," she said, so faintly he barely heard it. Silas didn't hesitate. He stepped in front of her, hand reaching for the rifle that hadn't been touched in years. The instincts came back fast. They always did when something worth protecting stood behind you. "Friends of yours?" he asked. though he already knew the answer by the way she trembled. The lead writer's voice was slick with false charm. "Evening, we're looking for a woman. Auburn hair, green eyes, goes by Mercy." Mercy's grip tightened on Silas's arm. Her voice was steady, but her body shook. "Don't know anyone by that name," Silas replied, not moving an inch. The writer chuckled without mirth. "Interesting. Cause our horse tracked her straight to your door." The others shifted slightly. "Trained men. Dangerous men." Then Mercy stepped forward, despite Silas's silent plea to stay back. "Jeremiah," she said, "I told you I'm not coming back." The man's grin dropped. His eyes turned sharp. "You don't get to decide that, wife." The word felt like venom in the air. Not for what it meant, but how he said it, possessive, cold, like she was something to be reclaimed. "I took nothing that wasn't mine," Mercy said, voice rising with strength. "The money was my father's. You had no right." "Your father's dead," Jeremiah snapped. "What was his became mine when you married me, just like you." His hand moved toward the gun at his hip. Then came the blow Silas hadn't expected. "And just like our son," Mercy gasped. Silas turned slowly toward her, the world shifting. Thomas. A boy hidden, that was what she was running from. Not just a husband, but a monster. As she wasn't just fighting for her life, she was fighting for her child's. And now, Silas realized, he was in this too, whether he wanted to be or not. Silas had always believed peace was found in silence, that the ache of grief could be dulled by time and distance. For 20 years, he'd lived that belief alone on a stretch of rugged land where the wind whispered like memories. He tried not to remember, but the moment Jeremiah rode up with that smug smile and steel in his voice, everything Silas thought he knew about solitude began to crack. "Boys belong with their fathers, wives with their husbands," Jeremiah said, his tone warm as a snake's breath. "We're going home. Mercy, all of us." The air thickened with his threat, curling like smoke from a funeral pyre. Silas felt the old rifle in his hands, a weight he hadn't carried in years but suddenly remembered too well. He could see the odds. 3 armed men, Mercy caught between them, danger in every twitch of movement. He hadn't wanted a fight in 20 years, but fear has a sharp edge when it's forged from love. "She's not going anywhere," Silas said, the words falling like a hammer in the tense air. "Not with you." Jeremiah turned, eyes narrowing. There was a flicker assessment, then dismissal. "Old man, this doesn't concern you. Walk away." But Silas had walked away from too many things in life: love, family, hope, and now, with Mercy's wide eyes pleading for something she hadn't dared ask, he couldn't walk away anymore. "I'm not walking anywhere," he said evenly, raising the rifle just enough to make the point. "But you are, off my land." Now, a silence fell, heavy, ready to explode. Jeremiah's hand twitched near his holster, but Silas didn't flinch. 20 years of quiet had taught him patience. 20 years of mourning had taught him what was worth dying for. "You're making a mistake," Jeremiah hissed, the veneer of civility gone. "That woman is mine by law." The boy is safe," Mercy cut in. Her voice was steadier. "Now, braver. I left him with people who love him, not with men who treat children like cattle." Silas glanced at her, pride swelling inside him. She was fire, barely held in check. She wasn't the same woman who'd come to his door trembling with desperation. She was something more now, sharpened by fear, refined by courage. Jeremiah scowled. "You think you can hide forever? I've got connections. Everyone from here to the territories is looking for you." "Then it's a good thing she's not hiding," Silas said calmly. "She's rebuilding, learning, living." That seemed to rattle Jeremiah more than the rifle. His gaze flicked between the two of them, searching for the bond he didn't understand. "What's she to you? You barely know her." A fair question. 3 days ago, Silas might have agreed. But grief can dull the heart, not kill it, and Mercy, with her quiet strength and stubborn determination, had awakened something in him. "She's under my protection," Silas said. "That's all you need to know." Jeremiah's face twisted with anger. "Protection? From you?" He scoffed. "I could burn this place to the ground and no one would care." But it wasn't Silas who answered. It was Mercy, stepping forward, her green eyes alight with fury. "You're wrong about him and you're damn wrong about me. I'm not the scared girl you married. I've learned to shoot, I've learned to stand, and I would rather die free than live as your property." The force in her words silenced everything. Even the wind held its breath. Silas felt it in his bones, the strength in her, the absolute clarity of a woman who had survived the fire and come out forged anew. Jeremiah sneered, but his swagger had slipped. "You think this old fool can protect you? I'll be back, with men, with papers, and maybe your protector here won't be so lucky next time." He turned, spitting the threat into the dust, and rode off with his men into the twilight. As their silhouettes vanished into the dusk, a strange, forgotten feeling crept over Silas. He felt alive. Mercy stood beside him, trembling. "He'll be back. He always follows through." Silas nodded. "I know." His solitude had just ended in a blaze of gunpowder and principle, and yet, as he looked at her alive with defiance, still standing, he felt no regret. He opened the door. "Tell me about your son." Inside, the house was modest but solid, built with hands that had known hard work and harder grief. Mercy settled into a chair near the cold hearth, her expression softening. "Thomas is 6. He has my eyes, his father's stubbornness." She smiled faintly. "He's with my sister in Kansas City. She runs a boarding house. No one will notice one more child." Her hands tightened in her lap. "Jeremiah wanted my father's inheritance. It was mine by law, but he saw it as his. He used my son to control me, threatened him, so I ran." Silas understood the desperation that drove a person to flee. He'd done the same once, only instead of running from danger, he'd run from pain. "Why here? Why ranching?" "Because I'm tired of running," Mercy whispered. "Thomas deserves a place to call home. I thought if I learned how to survive off the land, we could vanish." Silas studied her, then spoke the truth she didn't want to admit. "Jeremiah found you here. He'll find you anywhere." Her voice cracked with frustration. "So what? I just give up. Let him raise my son to be like him." "No," Silas said quietly. "I say we make sure he never finds you again." She blinked, stunned. "By the way." Silas turned to the window, checking the darkness. "I've been alone for a long time, Mercy. I thought I needed it, but watching you fight it reminded me that maybe I want something more." She reached for words, but he stopped her gently. "Jeremiah was right about one thing. I talk more to cows than people, but I know this land. I know how to disappear without ever leaving, and I know how to fight for something worth keeping." In the days that followed, she stayed, and Silas taught her everything about the ranch, about survival, about holding your ground in a world that doesn't always play fair. She learned fast, but it was her laughter that healed him. More than any labor, her touch, the warmth in her voice as she sang while making coffee, the life she brought into his hollow world. "You've changed," she said one evening, the two of them watching the sun bleed across the mountains. "Maybe I had to," he replied. "Maybe you reminded me why." The kiss didn't come with ceremony or warning, only the quiet certainty of two people who had found something rare and real in the unlikeliest of places. Then came the thunder of hooves. A dozen riders, a marshal, and Jeremiah, smug once more. "I have a warrant," the marshal called, "for theft, kidnapping, abandonment of marriage." Silas stood behind Mercy as she stepped forward with calm defiance. "I have legal documents, my inheritance, proof of threats, witnesses, and I had every right to protect my child." Jeremiah tried to scoff, but Silas unfolded a paper, handing it to the marshal, a divorce decree. Silas explained, "Filed 3 weeks ago in Denver, with testimony, with evidence, and with legal custody assigned to Mercy's sister." Jeremiah's face fell. "You son of a..." Mercy cut him off. "You have no power here anymore." And as the riders turned back, defeated, the night no longer felt threatening. It felt like a beginning. "How did you..." Mercy began. Silas looked at her softly. "A man alone that long learns to write damn good letters, and sometimes love gives you the courage you didn't know you had, under a sky scattered with stars." She kissed him again, and for the first time in 2 decades, Silas Ward knew what it meant to live. 6 months later, when Thomas arrived and found a smiling mother and a gentle man who taught him how to milk cows and ride horses, the boy didn't ask about the past. He only asked if he could stay. Dot and Mercy, standing beside Silas with the sun behind her and the wind in her hair, finally knew what she'd found wasn't just safety, it wasn't just survival. She'd found home.